Yeah. So, hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Connect Africa. So, today, as usual, it's like a
Hello, good evening.
sorry about that. Yeah. So, actually Thursday is a weekly program that where we see, what's going on in the continent. So we pick a topic and we talk about that. So we are here for the same program. So our topic for today is African Union-led peace talk on Ethiopia, which is currently going on in South Africa. So for that, we have guests here, analysts, to talk on that issue, to share their views with us. Welcome, Dr. Binyam, and welcome, Ato Gabriel Hiwet Unatu. Welcome.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Thank you. It's our pleasure to have you here. Yeah, so let's kick it. I'm going to start with Dr. Let me introduce them briefly. So yeah, Dr. Binyam Miskun. He's a lecturer at KwaZulu-Natal University in South Africa, and he is also specialized in the Horn Affair political issues. So he shared with us his views. Maybe I wouldn't say on a regular basis, but he has been here many times. Ato Gabrahiwet Unatu, he is new for Connect Africa, but hopefully he will share his views also in the coming on different topics. So Ato Gabrahiwet Unatu, he on his educational background, he studied law and also he worked for Ethiopian government for the Ministry of Federal Affairs, especially for the administration of refugees and returnees affairs, and also after that, and which is called in abbreviation ARA, he has worked in various parts of the world related to that. But currently, he's also doing in he has returned after the reform to Ethiopia, and he's mainly working related to management consultancy. So welcome again, my brothers. I will start with Brother Binyam. So currently, as we all know, the African Union-led peace negotiation is going on where you are based, by the way, in South Africa, in Pretoria. So this peace negotiation is where I think most Africans, let's say maybe for those of us who are Pan-Africans, which we hoped is a kind of the African solution to African problems. But we see that since it started or since it's kicked off in the beginning of the week, there has been, there are many actors, even previous to that as well. And we have seen, if we start from the time that, originally it was October 7th, then it was postponed by the last minute notice of the former president of Kenya. And then we have seen Mike Hammer in the region for more than a week, maybe about 2 weeks by now. And he has been giving press briefings. Also, Uhuru Kenyatta has gave his statement to one online newspaper based in Kenya. Also Faki Mohammed, Mike Hammer, except Olusegun Obasanjo. Also the Ethiopian government has did its part. So with all these actors and considering what has been, in the stake, can we say that is this what we hoped, this peace negotiation or this peace talk on Ethiopia, that African solution to African problems, or can we say is it kind of hijacked?
Okay, I think let's start from the beginning. Yeah? What do we mean by an African problem, an African solution to an African problem? It only means that we want to do it ourselves. We want to be able to address our challenges as a collective, individual states, but also other African states coming together in support of that. And it's a matter of principle. Yeah? Irrespective of African Union shortcomings, Ethiopian government has insisted on this. Yeah. It does not mean that the Ethiopian government has no misgivings about the process and the steps that are being taken, but without saying that, it has actually embraced this institution It is the founding member of this institution. So there is something to preserve, something to protect, something to pursue. Yeah, that's very important. The second element is we want peace. Yeah, we do want peace. Everyone wants this peace to take effect. And any negotiation, we know there are gives and takes. But what we are seeing is an attempt to actually somehow control it, manage it. I don't know if you recall the number of times the Europeans and the Americans have made Obasanjo, and it was blatant. Even today, the US wasn't offered an observer status, but it has now an observer status. In fact, we all quipped that Mike Hammer, what is he going to do? Is he going to sit in the foyer waiting for them, outside? Is he going to coach them? What is he, a negotiator? A mediator? What role is he going to assume? Now it is official that he has an observer status as the US. And the Europeans are complaining that why is that we weren't allowed into this? Why do they want to be there? Why do they want to be there? To influence it. And of course, African Union is always subject to influence because it is ever more dependent on external funding. Much of the funding that African Union enjoys comes from European Union. And of course, a substantial amount from China and the US as well. So you have to understand, the kind of pressure African Union would always find itself in. And it is within this kind of context now we're seeing this geopolitical rambling, and the US and Europeans want to somehow maneuver this to serve their perceived geopolitical interests, and they have been imposing themselves endlessly into this process, thrown themselves at this process, which we were hoping that would be an African-led and an African states, taking part to address their own challenges, and then of course the supporters will be the Obasanjo's role. Even Uhuru Kenyatta's entry into this is questionable, but despite that, Kenya is a neighbor. So we don't, with all the challenges and misgivings we have with this, then Kenya should play its part as well as a neighbor, in bringing about peace, but not at the behest of the US, and that's what we didn't like, And it felt like that it was the US that's pressuring Kenyan state and politicians to take this kind of position. And it has come to South Africa, and now both parties had made before, but then this is more or less the biggest one and the most official one, and therefore we hope that it means something, but no one has a faith on it except the Americans. I don't know what they want to get out of it. Perhaps we can talk about that. What is that they want out of this process? The Ethiopian government has made it very clear what it wants from this, and TPLF, perhaps coached by the Americans, have repeated the same claims, demands that the Americans have been making. 4 demands I read, I think. Free entry to journalists. What would that do to Tigray? I don't know, but they had demanded for that. The second one is humanitarian. Everybody agrees to that. Unfettered access, they call it. But we know what that means. We want aid to go into the most needy. That's all. That's the basic. And even if you include the services along with that, that can be accepted. And then they have that bizarre request that Eritrea must leave Tigray. I don't know where Eritrea is in this picture, but obviously they try to dragging Eritrea into those issues all the time. Perhaps it would help them internationalize the issue. But so far, we haven't got any evidence of Eritrea's involvement, despite their numerous claims that Eritrea soldiers were seen here and there and did this and that. Even with the air campaigns that Ethiopian army had been undertaking, it was constantly they were constantly mentioning Eritrean name. But anyway, I don't know if they're asking Eritrea must leave Badme, which is already recognized international boundary. But, and I think we should see the background as a little bit more broader. Yeah, there is a principal issue. There are processes that have been hijacked. There are still some elements that are goodwill based, and others are a very important decision by Ethiopian government. You know, it wants to see a resolution to this conflict. Yeah, and coming to the negotiating table with the upper hand, perhaps would, you know, Ethiopian politicians must have felt that it would give them a lot more leverage to somehow find a resolution to this problem. We all want this resolution to this war. It has to come to an end, and I think we should see it from that perspective. You muted.
Mohammed,
you muted.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Yeah, so you that's it for you for the first question, or you will?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, thank you. Okay. I'm gonna come to Ato Gebrahiwet, or Wendem Gebrahiwet, I would rather go by. You will share with us, you know, what you feel. I saw my thing that is it kind of hijacked? Is it really now as it has been said, or as it has been appointed? That is it really Olusegun Obasanjo that's leading this peace negotiation? So you can add on what Brother Binyam said, but also I would like to ask you specifically regarding the former president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, that if we have seen, you know, he did this politics acrobatic in his relation with Ethiopia, or rather with personally Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. We have seen, you know, his good speech during the inauguration after the election, where, you know, most of the Eastern Africa presidents were found, which were really good. And then we have seen also a year ago in November where Senator Blinken was visiting the region, where he defended, you know, basically addressing the issue of those journalists where Kenya is mostly accused, where they sit there and give their whatever analysis as if they are experts on each country in the continent. Yeah, and then he was like really back and forth. He has met several times, but then immediately after the election, when William Ruto came in the picture, he kind of, you know, changed it. And just hours before, I would say, before the scheduled peace negotiation, which was originally on 7 October, he sent that notice, more or less echoing what is required by TPLF as a precondition from the Ethiopian government. And then now after this, he sent his statement, which I said earlier, published by the East African or something. I'm going to give I have the link where he said, you know, even the headline goes by President Uhuru Kenyatta is attending now, leading the peace talk after his requirements met. That's what the headline runs. So, and then again, all there is what he has been said again. So, why this political? We have discussed this, Brother Binyam remembers, with other panelists as well here at Connect Africa, but I know that you have your own view or your angles where you look at this. Why this political acrobatic by Uhuru Kenyatta? And of course, don't forget to share your view if this peace negotiation is really led by the African Union. Back to you, Gabriel. Are you muted?
I think I am, if you can hear me.
Yes.
Yes. One, yes, I don't think the framing of the question, I think that's slightly too, it's not as expressive as it can be, I think, as detailed as it can be. Diplomacy is a political act. I mean, it's the politics of governments. And of course, politics isn't ever simple. Sorry, my camera on this, I'm new to this app, so it's a bit. So I don't think we should talk in terms that simplify everyone's intentions into hijack or not, or even as the good doctor was saying, to Dr. Binyam was saying, to see it as, well, is this an African process if all of these people are involved? I think we have to be very honest about some things. We have a saying in Amharic, ወንድ ልጅ እውነቱን ተናግሮ የመሸበት ያድራል. And I think if we're going to solve any problems, we're going to have to start with being very honest. The Ethiopian government has made two things clear. I don't think they've made what they want out of this peace deal verbally clear, but they have made two things clear. The first is that they are not willing to negotiate on the sovereignty of Ethiopia. And that has normal consequences. They're not willing to discuss with the Americans or the TPLF about the presence of Eritrea. We have an agreement in Jeddah as of 2018. We have a series of agreements that were proposed, and the Ethiopian parliament has accepted. We don't need the acceptance of my Kamer or the AU or anyone else, really. And that is the government position. So that's not on the table. How that will play out, we'll see. But because we have to be honest, the Ethiopian government has also said that the TPLF is acting as a proxy for the US. As a former anchor state under the former American government's anchor state policy as designed in 1991, 1992. The document is freely available in the congressional records of the US Congress. And so if they are only acting as a proxy, not to have America at the table in one capacity or another just means we don't have a peace negotiation. That is also, I think, something we have to recognize. If I think it's a good thing that the US were given some position. Obviously, you can't say the empire. You can't say, oh, the people who are managing TPLF, even though that's what we're all thinking. And so the government made it clear that we need to have a peace with the actual people making the decisions. Nobody thinks Sadkan is making the decisions. Nobody thinks that Debretsion is making the decisions. The decisions are being made by the Pentagon. They're being made by the State Department. They're being made in Washington, D.C. Sometimes, and mostly, as you said, in Kenya, because in Kenya, there are a lot of US government officials, European officials who have a lot of regional say. And so they have, their presence is somewhat required if we're going to have a negotiated settlement. If you say, I will not talk to them, that means we're going to finish it militarily. Because at the end of the day, once you've started a war, there's really one or two ways to end it. Either one side wins, absolutely, or you negotiate. In terms of winning absolutely now, the Ethiopian government also has made its position very clear in Amharic, just not in English. And that is, I think, somewhat tactical for this government, that what they say in Amharic doesn't exactly, or Afan Oromo, or Af Somali or Tigrinya, does not translate ever exactly into English. When they left after the first insurgency by the TPLF, when they withdrew from Tigray, they said, we have returned to our Dejen. That is a very specific political term in Ethiopia. That is the basis of your state. Once you say, I have left to my Dejen, there is no Dejen in Tigray. That was clear to every Tigray. That was clear to every, and I'm part Tigray. None of my relatives saw it any differently to how I'm describing it. So it's not just me in my own world. And the same in Amara region. If you watch Amara Media Corporation's TV and all the rest of it, they're very specifically saying, well, the population of Tigray have sided with the TPLF. We are no longer administering there. That also has its consequences in Ethiopian governance. And I think we can discuss that another time. So I think at least these three things are clear from the Ethiopian side to me, to my mind. I'm not so clear as to how I would say they've made any other clear statements about what they want to see. They do want peace, that they've made clear. And they've said now, which we come to the second point of what I'd take objection to how you have framed the question, and also how Dr. Binyam has responded, is they have said African solutions to African problems. But what are Africa's problems? Africa's problems are our borders were all made by our foreign enemies, by colonialists. And it's not just the borders of our neighbors. Ethiopia was never colonized. But if you see, for example, the Somalian or Somali community, they have been split up across many regions. Partly because before the British and French empires came to Africa, Somali kingdoms running the Gulf of Aden had a great extensive capital market. They had their own trading routes all the way to Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, and they wanted those trade routes. So they made it their job to break up the Somali nation. Now, some Somali are in Ethiopia, some Somali are in Somalia, some Somali are in Kenya. And that means it has consequences to how we deal with each other. When Musa Faki asks us to come sit down at the table, he does have to balance our interests. He's a politician. He does not represent only Ethiopia. And I think he has his own political agenda. What that may be, we can all discuss. We can have different views. He makes it clear. I think he has policy documents that are available online at the African Union. I take people at their word at the best I can, unless I can prove they're lying. So I would refer to those first. And they do not see this war or how it should end exactly the way the Ethiopian government does. There will be disagreements. The TPLF means a very different thing to them as it does to us. And then South Africa has its own interests as well. People wouldn't think that, but in that anchor state policy, South Africa was one of the other anchor states. They had extensive relationships with the US vis-a-vis the TPLF, and especially Zadkan, who had an office in South Africa, who managed a consultancy in South Africa. And that consultancy was a military consultancy and a strategic intelligence, military intelligence consultancy. And he worked for even the UN officially in South Sudan. So there are a lot of interests, I'm sure, that they have of their own that we are not aware of. But to the extent that we're saying African solutions for African problems, South Africa and the Somali state and Musa Faki are Africans. And they don't all agree with us. That's the other thing. So we have a set of borders and a set of countries designed by our enemies coming together in the AU or somewhere else to negotiate, but they represent interests that go beyond some of these borders. And that works for Ethiopia as well. Abiy Ahmed, our prime minister, the Ethiopian prime minister, has committed to open borders with Somalia, open borders with Kenya. This has its own connotations for the law, for the economy, for the AU. The AU doesn't agree with all of those connotations. Our neighbors don't all agree with all of those connotations. The US and Europe definitely do not agree with all of those connotations. So I think diplomacy is about balancing interests, and I don't think we should talk so quickly about hijack, in my view. I mean, please prove me wrong, but in my view, I think it's better to give it time and see what comes out of this. It does not seem to me that the Ethiopian government is a government that if they felt that this negotiation did not reflect the best protection of the sovereignty of Ethiopia, that they would accept. I don't think that's the case. We have not had a government that is as pro-American as Abiy Ahmed's government. 2 of his cabinet members worked for the American government, either the CDC or the USAID. Cabinet members. He himself considers America as a model of progress, of decency, he said in his book, Meddemar. However, the reason they have had a falling out is that he was not willing to compromise on what he saw as the sovereign rights of Ethiopia. I think so far they've maintained that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not a supporter of Abiy in domestic policy. I'm not a neoliberal, I'm a socialist. Almost every policy he has, I think I'll disagree with. Some I agree with. But I don't think he would consider it, he would accept a deal that does not reflect Ethiopian sovereign rights. And I think also Musa Faki and others understand that. As for the acrobatics of Uhuru Kenyatta, yes, I have theories, many theories. I think everybody has theories. My own personal one is that he's no longer president, and he has a view to some regional positions, some maybe even the AU presidency soon. I'm sure it's going to be up for grabs soon enough, and if you're well placed enough, make a friend of Ethiopia, make a friend of South Africa, make a friend of a lot of donors. That does put you in a better position for that kind of role. Before he left Kenya, everybody knows the controversial statements he made about his own his own successor, his own wife as president. So I mean, I will not guess what he's going to do. We'll see. But I do think he's pursuing a personal political agenda alongside the formal agenda that he's been asked to pursue. So I think we'll see how it unfolds. And that would be how I would approach this topic. I mean, please, if you have any retort, then maybe we can go forward. Thank you.
No, thank you, Gabriel, for that. It's always good to have different views, and then it's interesting. I will go to Brother Biniam. What really surprised me, and also others, was that South Africa, actually in joint statement, it was the US and South Africa who, during the commencement of this peace, the current peace talk, where they say they give a safety guarantee to the participants, and including, of course, TPLF. And as they said, that was also the issue for TPLF to come. And that was like one of the reasons for TPLF for the postponement of the original schedule. Can you just dive us, if you have some background, what is the position of South Africa in this peace talk?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. As Brother Gilray has said, South Africa is not saying much about it. It's interest, yeah. Interest guides what they do, yeah. And of course, there is element of the rhetoric about African positions and collective positions, collective bargaining. And then the same mantra we were talking about, African solutions to African problems. Right? South Africa wants to champion that, but at the same time, it has always operated as the anchor state, yeah, to Western domination in the region and in the continent. It positioned itself as a gateway to Africa. Gateway for who? Yeah. That's many of the companies that operate in South Africa are Americans and Europeans, and they use South Africa as a launching pad to, to move around the rest of the continent. And the Southern Africa is, very much dominated by companies that operate from South Africa and often owned by interests in London and New York and Australia. Yeah. So that's very important to understand where South Africa is in this a broader political economy in the continent. Yeah. So there is element of interest. Yeah, but there is also some goodwill. Yeah, to support Ethiopia, to see Ethiopia thrive, and African problems being addressed in one way or another. So I will try to put those two in balance. Yeah, the kind of bring a tool to Western domination, and also benefiting from that process, but at the same time also having some African radical Africanist position. Yeah, if I can use that term. Yeah, because there are elements within the ruling party and outside of the ruling party that have a serious influence in politics in this country. Have this very strong position, yeah, about Africa and African resources and how to protect African interests. So there is that mismatch often, yeah. But yet you would have to see those two coming to the table definitely. In the same way Kenya is doing it, and I'm sure Gabriel has alluded to that in some ways. Kenya is vying with Ethiopia to be the anchor states. Yeah. So, pandering to this interest, Western interest, be able to put American interest in the best position would allow Kenya to be treated as the anchor state and a significant state. And prior to 1991, Kenya was the anchor state. It's only in 1991, 1993, around 1993, that Ethiopia took that position. Yeah. And prior, the Derg regime, Ethiopia was also the anchor state. So you see going back and forth, regional rivalries are created. And the West deliberately uses that. And I also felt that they are trying to use a permanent seat at the UN Security Council to somehow find, interest within Africa to play them against each other so that they become ever more beholden to Western interests. Yeah? So they're pandering to that. We're going to campaign for you, but do ABCD. You must play by the book. If we give you the support, you're going to get your place in there. Yeah. So it's trying to sway them away from China as part of the calculation. And of course, more recently, the Russians are emerging in the African discourse. Yeah. Americans and Westerners have. Yeah. But you must understand those positions about South Africa as well. It wants to play that role, but with also an Africanist face, Africanist rhetoric and also practice as well. NEPAD, for example, which was championed by President Mbeki, was trying to address African challenges through innovative ways of dealing with our issues. Yeah, a solution that comes from us, and then that can only happen by working with each other. And I think the West has learned that they can only benefit if they keep us divided, yeah, and play us against each other. Yeah, the fact that they're pushing Kenya into this. They're pushing a frog march in Kenya in some ways, and of course, some individuals, the same way Uhuru might see, an interest in playing it within in that, impose his own interest in that process. Kenya is being frog marched by the US. Kenya was being reluctant to come into this, but the US had been pushing them. You must understand how many times those American envoys, the 3 or the 4 now, I don't know how many, the lost count, they keep on going to Kenya. They were going to Sudan as well and asking Sudan to be mediator, while Sudan has a conflict, an obvious conflict, an open conflict with Ethiopia. Yeah, and then they came in using the name of IGAD at the time. You must remember. Yeah, because Sudanese president is the head chair of, IGAD at the time. So, well, still to this day, and for all intents and purposes, they try to rally Sudan to play a mediator role, because they know they can use Sudan, the $10 billion they promise, and they also promising Ethiopia, but they're still not addressing it. That's how they play the game. Yeah, they use this kind of leverage in order to get their way in the continent and elsewhere. Yeah, and they use all institutions, all processes, and including the AU, IGAD, whatever you name it. Yeah, they can co-opt them, and because those organizations are dependent for their funding on the US and the EU. And that is very much well met. South Africa also plays that, does what to intimidate Europeans by openly claiming that they are siding with Russia or the China, precisely because the capital in this country is effectively Western. And with here, the discourse is a bit too radical. The white monopoly capital, they call it. And as soon as South Africa tries to either move into a broader socialist route, then the first thing that they do is you start to see capital flights, away from South Africa, and the rand value just dropping significantly and having a severe effect on the economy. And all politicians in this country are saying, "Oh, okay, we have to toe the line. We don't want to go the Zimbabwe route." That's the discourse that they have. Yeah, if you don't toe the line, you get to be punished so badly. Yeah, so I wouldn't say they are that courageous to be able to engage in an independent foreign policy and embrace completely an Africanist policy. They try to balance their interests with an African interest, a broader African interest, with all its rhetorics and sometimes delusional element that its kind of characterization has. You talk about Africanists, but then you want to enforce your border. You are xenophobic at the same time. Yeah, you talk about Africa and the broader African project. So, I see the contradiction. Yeah, and we need to place it within that kind of frame that we all find ourselves in, broader frames. Yeah, political, economic. Yeah, and other social dynamics that continue to shape those processes. And I think I would leave it here for this particular question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother Biniam. So everybody's trying to play it safe, as they call it in football. Sometimes you have those rhetorics of Pan-African thing, and then also you, on the other hand, you are dependent on the others. Going to this is actually a question for both, but I will start with Brother Gabra Hiwat. I still have, hard time to understand or to wake from the shock of how a foreign military plane comes and, flown an armed group from a sovereign country to the peace talk negotiation place. Of course, there are routes that they used. Do you think this is, and after that, we have seen that the government of Ethiopia has released a statement through its communication office that it would be a necessity now to take back the control of the airports and other infrastructures to really keep the sovereignty of the country. Just take us, walk us through that. What's your take about that?
Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Well, first I want to say I agreed with almost everything you said. That was I would like to explore further the political economy aspect also, though, and also some of the changes that are happening, because I think the dynamics in Sudan are a bit surprising even for America, as you might have seen recently. Sudan has gone back to making the arrangements with China about the deep port. And America is trying to overthrow Burhan again after overthrowing the last guy to put him in. So it is getting complicated. On the sovereignty and how we can how we view that they were allowed safe egress, I think the Ethiopian government allowed it. So that's how it happened. That's also why they had to stop in Addis Ababa, stayed over, and then left. So it wasn't just that they flew over with some military plane like a paratrooper. The Ethiopian government did allow that plane to take them out. But once you've agreed to a negotiation, you can't also imprison your negotiators, your interlocutors. That would not be a negotiation. And I think the Ethiopian government is committed to a negotiation, in my view. I don't know. Of course, I'm not privy to how the senior officials talk and think in private. But at least those civil servants that I know, that I'm still in touch with from my days as a civil servant, in their view, the Ethiopian government is very committed. And so obviously the interlocutors had to be allowed to cross if you're going to negotiate. I think the capture of the insistence of Ethiopia that they will no longer allow the possibility of airports or other infrastructure that might support an attack against Ethiopia, it's something that Dr. Binyam touched upon. It's that the Americans and others do have a practice of overthrowing governments. They've overthrown a lot of ours. They've paid Ethiopia to overthrow a government in Somalia. They've paid Ethiopia to help break up Sudan. I mean, that didn't happen on its own. And so the same people who did that, don't forget that our prime minister used to be lieutenant colonel in our military intelligence and signaling during the Somali war and during the Sudanese war. So I think they also know that there is a risk of intervention. They're not always very comfortable with that. So I think when they felt that their sense of risk was heightened beyond which they would tolerate, they took over the airports. It was seen as an escalation by foreign governments, but the same foreign governments who the Ethiopian government is worried will invade us. So on balance, I think that's, I don't know their heart, I would say, but I understand that geopolitically they cannot allow America to be able to land troops or munitions beyond which Egypt could provide. When Egypt was providing the munitions, the 10 trips that came to deliver munitions to the TPLF, and some of the munitions they delivered were heavy-duty munitions. And the Ethiopian government made it clear they had intelligence, they knew it was happening. They did not attack at that point, hoping to resolve this peacefully, in my view. And that is what the government has said. I haven't seen anything to discount it. On the TPLF side, since the last plane was stopped and this last push showed that they could no longer gain a battlefield advantage, they have gone out and asked for aid from America directly. Saad Khan himself was in more than one interview. The most public one has been with the Heritage Foundation. Outside of that, he's had meetings with the Atlantic Council, which is the think tank for NATO. You can check their diaries for ministers who are present. That's how we know it happened. The meeting was not publicized. Well, not ministers, but officials, the senior officials from the US and UK governments who are present. It is in their diaries. And so you know that they've discussed with this man. You know these countries have invaded recently. The UK and America have troops fighting in Yemen now. I mean, the UK has had since the past 5 years. And according to the US, they've sent special forces to help in Shabwa when the French landed as well 3 months ago. So obviously, for someone like Abiy, who sees so many of his enemies feeling comfortable in Yemen and having allies in the region, I mean, we don't have to name the leadership that we consider American allies now, I think, but it's clear from their actions. And so I think it's nervousness, and they took over that infrastructure that they felt would diminish our sovereignty. Having said that, so far they're still saying we're going to go for a people's government in Tigray. They're not trying to run an occupation. They're not trying to run an administration. What they're saying is we could not allow this to continue. We will allow you to have a people's government. This is code for, if you still want the TPLF, bring them, let them lead. What we cannot have them do is run our radio stations, our power dams, and our airfields, which is, there's a clear reason for that at this point, I think. So it is an escalation to some people. To my mind, I think it's the best compromise. I think it's the best decision that could have been made under the circumstances. I think our government is rightly nervous about America's nervousness. They've become very bellicose. You have Europe talking about we have to be more present in Africa. It's a jungle, we're the gardeners. And when fascists talk like that, they've invaded before. So I think we prepare, and I think there's a sense of also impending attack. The entire last 2 days on Ethiopian regional TVs in Somali region, Ethiopia region, Amhara region, and SNNPR ran shows showing how Ethiopia may be invaded. who would invade, who the biggest enemy is. Maybe for an hour or 2 hours in the case of some ran full interviews with people talking about, oh, the Americans want to invade, this, that, the other. So there is a sense we need to resolve this, and I think that's where it's coming from. Saad Khan publicly asking for an intervention, and Getachew Redda publicly asking for an intervention in the last 3 weeks also, and the West not saying no. None of the Western governments came out and said, "Of course we won't. That's impossible." No, none of them said that. So there's also there's also a discomfort, I think, and a legitimate one. And what Dr. Binyam just said was also accurate. There are anchor states that are still operating as anchor states. And it's not just because, I think, of state capture. For Ethiopia, for Sudan, for Chad, for Mali, we have native institutions that we can rely on to govern our markets, to go back to trade. I really genuinely don't think the problem of poverty in Ethiopia is about, in Africa in general, is about, industrialization, this, that, the other. I think administering our own markets, the structuring our own our own economies, structuring our legal systems to support those economies was something that is actively destroyed by Western governments and by our own governments, who believed that copying things from the West or from Russia and just copying it and bringing it here was a good idea. I'm a socialist, but I think that was extremely foolish to just copy something from Stalin and bring it over. That was silly. And I think we still have to build a lot of institutions to get to a position where we can be comfortable in the kind of political solutions we have in Africa. And I think when that comfort level decreases for someone like Abiy Ahmed, who used to be a soldier, what you do is you take over the airports. And if he had not felt threatened, perhaps he would have been less eager to do that. I mean, now it's done. I think we can go forward. I think also the TPLF and the West are willing to go forward with the negotiations under the current circumstances. So we'll see how it goes, is my view on that, I would say. But I'm happy I would be, if I can ask a question, if it's okay though, to both of you, because I have very strong opinions about political economy. And since Dr. Binyam did bring it up, one of my worries when I see, when I worked in Kenya, and then when I hear people talk about South Africa, and when we talk about IGAD or NEPAD or the others, these are institutions that were designed with European, Westphalian, liberal democratic ideas from Belgium and Germany, and don't really reflect the political conditions of anywhere in Africa, into my view. I'm not so accustomed to NEPAD myself, but IGAD definitely. When I was working in Somali region, there was not a Somali, there was not a Tigray, there was not an Amara, there was not an Oromo that would look at IGAD and say, this is how governance should happen. Earlier you mentioned ARA, the agency I worked for, was 100% an Ethiopian government agency that was under the National Intelligence and Security Service, NIS. It was 100% funded by the US and Britain through UNHCR. 100%. Not a single salary is paid by Ethiopia. And so the question is, if they're paying for ARA to implement policy, whose policies? It is clear, now it is clear, I think, in Ethiopia, not our policies. Definitely not our policies. And one has to wonder how many more institutions like that there are. And it's not just that the West brings them here. There are civil servants that I know. If I went to them and said, ARA has to be disbanded, it is not well set up. I don't think it is. It was never designed in a way to approach the refugee issue properly. But it still exists. No Ethiopian civil servant will agree with me. If you were to interview another 20, I mean, I don't think there will be a single senior civil servant who will say it's wrong, it should be disbanded. A lot of them believe it's correct. And I think that is as big a problem to resolving these issues as the actual negotiation. And I think until our government, and I don't think our government has been honest, can sit down and say, these are the problems. These are This is where America has influence over policy in Ethiopia. This is where the Great Britain has influence over Ethiopia. This is what they are doing militarily in Yemen, in Somalia, in Sudan. Until we become honest about those things, I don't know how close to a resolution we will be. And I would like to hear your views, if that's possible, on that, if it's okay to ask questions.
Yeah, sure. Wendem Gabrahewat. Hopefully, Brother Binyam has something to share with us and continue also on what has been said, on what I asked, regarding flying a military plane in a sovereign country. Yeah, you might add on it and also address Gabrahewat's question.
Sure.
Yeah.
Excellent. I think Zach Gabriel has raised a very important question. Yeah, funding reflects the funder's priority. If you look at IGAD was instituted when Ethiopia and Eritrea and good terms in 1991 to create a better, well-integrated region. And no other country is well integrated than Eritrea and Ethiopia. Yeah, in Africa. We could use this as a leverage to drive that process to take it to Somalia, Kenya, Sudan, and then expand it. Yeah, that was the intention. Now, IGAD was completely hijacked, so they co-opted it. How did they co-opt it? Through funding mechanisms. Now, if you look at the funding IGAD had been receiving over the last 20-something years, and I've seen it, all reflects security. While IGAD has placed a number of priorities, a number of priority areas, including drought control and an environmental crisis, migration, all this being laid out in a very important fashion, with a detailed one. And I know probably people who didn't like wrote it, but it was important. It reflects the challenges that the region is facing. If you see the funding that they had been receiving, it all reflects the security element, which means that it's been receiving money to go into Somalia, do some stuff in South Sudan. That was it. And two countries, Somalia and South Sudan, that the West had bungled so badly and damaged them so badly. And we can go into detail how they mismanaged those two countries and put them to the edge and to this kind of crisis that we're seeing in those two countries. We can talk about that. Yeah, failed state, and it's deliberate as a process. Yeah, and within that, then you would find not only the funders but people who had been used to getting money. You spoke about ARA, dismantling ARA, and people they are used to getting paid a really decent amount of money, and the states are also getting money out of that as well. So there are certain layers and layers to unpack. Yeah, with that comes. It's not only in institutions. Look at the journalists that we have. Look at other institutions that we have. Yeah, they've been co-opted. Yeah, they give them training and they offer them some money, and just so that they are used to those crimes, then they continue to be Muppets, literally. And I apologize for using that word to describe people, but that's exactly what they are doing. Now, they're no longer sending them John Whites. Yeah? They have already others who are willing to operate like one. Yeah, and in collaboration with John White. And that's how it has, operated. And with kind of respect that I have for our institutions, but I also need to be very honest that those are their shortcomings, and this is how they be manipulated. Yeah, if you say African Union must come down into only depending on state funding from member states, you would see the kind of walkouts. Yeah, because they're used to big fat salary. Yeah. And if you go to COMESA, then people being told that COMESA need to depend on its own funding, internal funding, because those fundings from the West are not reliable and they serve another ulterior agenda. they wouldn't listen to you because they are accustomed to that. Yeah, and it's very much difficult to break that. Yeah. At least not without a political cost. There will be a political cost, but if there is the political will, then it can be sorted out. But currently, the momentum is very hard to reverse, and it has been a big challenge for all institutions we have, including state institutions. They are addicted to aid. They cannot imagine a development project outside of aid. Yeah, and it goes back to what Basai Gebre has raised. Yeah, we could revisit our own institutions. There are mechanisms within them that would allow us to address poverty. Poverty is a very easy thing to address. It's complex, but it's very easy to address. All you have to do is go back to the basics. Not try to emulate others. Not try. So then this vanity projects. Massive investing in urban areas. You neglect the rural. Yeah, in a massive way. And then you create urban rural migration, and then that compounds the problem. Yeah? And you are constantly dependent on external forces and external resources, not your own resource, external resource. And that creates a vulnerability all the time. Yeah. But if you start to look inside, inward looking approach, I think you would rediscover the kind of riches that we have, the kind of resources that is within our disposal, and you would be surprised how much that can be achieved with so little resource that we have. I'll give you a very simple example. Here in South Africa, Eastern Cape, Ethiopia, people complain about drought and all that, right? Eastern Cape, not so much affected by drought, yeah? Of course, South Africa experienced so much drought, but this is a very lush area, yeah? Good for agriculture. Youth in that area are not interested in agriculture. They would rather go miles and miles in search of employment. And an employment that I'm talking about, not even a poverty wage that would provide, that this employment provide. Just because they, in their mind, already this has been inculcated in them that the only way to survive is to go into the mines. The only way to survive is to go and serve somebody else as an employee. Yeah. So you ignore the resource that you have, which is at your disposal. That's where we are currently. I wouldn't complain if I see somebody from northern Ethiopia migrating, because it's a drought-stricken, so many challenges there. But this is a lush area. So if you look into those resources, yeah, closer to those resources, even if they are marginal, they contribute so much. But we are now becoming ever more dependent on external forces and external resources, and that is subjecting us to this kind of vulnerabilities we're talking about, people being co-opted, institutions being co-opted, serving Western agenda that are against our interests, and that's what we're talking about. If those agendas were, in sync with our interest, we would embrace them happily. But they are against our interests. They are only facilitating the looting of our own resources. Yeah. Our opportunities. That's basically what those objectives are, grand objectives. And I'll take you to what we said about the US and what the US is trying to achieve, and then I'll go why the military move. And the US has some interest, and it needs to be said. And I said it on a couple of occasions, and I don't think people took it very seriously. Remember when TPLF was in power, the one excuse that they always gave for handling TPLF with the glove is because if we pushed them so hard, Ethiopia would collapse. Yeah? They wouldn't even bat an eye on them. Yeah? They were handling them with gloves, and they were very explicit. And I think a couple of articles have been written based on this. Yeah? 2 academic articles, in fact, yeah, and then a few other newspaper articles. They were very explicit. They were saying that, we cannot push them that hard. 1, it's not going to get result. 2, it's going to destroy Ethiopia. Now, look at what they are doing to Abiy's government. Yeah, the kind of pressure they have put to save TPLF, it's pushing Ethiopia into disintegration. Yeah, the excuse they gave some years ago was, disintegration of Ethiopia must be prevented. Now they're pushing this country toward this disintegration. It's not because they do not know what the TPLF's intentions are. TPLF intentions are very clear. They want to emerge as a dominant force in the region at any cost, whether it's by creating a Tigray as an independent state, whether it is by controlling Ethiopia and Eritrea or disintegrating them, either whatever the cost is, they must emerge as dominant force. That's basically the bottom line for them. Okay, what does America want within this configuration? Remember, they came out with two important documents some few years ago, even before 2018. The peace accord between Ethiopia and Eritrea was materialized. They came with the Nile Basin Initiative and the Red Sea Basin Initiative. What is that they want in those two arenas that they see are very critical? The Nile Basin Initiative is about water security. For who? For who is the question? Is it for Ethiopia, Sudan? Yeah? Is it for Egypt, Israel, Saudi Arabia? Which country's interest is being defended here? Yeah? The second one is the Red Sea Basin Initiative, once again having control over this very important route. And they're so displeased with China coming to Djibouti. Remember this, China has already entered that a very significant area, that gateway, yeah, between Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Now they are bitter by that. And if you want to control those two basins, yeah, Red Sea Basin and Nile Basin, yeah, you would have to reconfigure maps. Or alternatively, you would have to reconfigure politics altogether. So at this stage, and I'm thinking that they really don't give a damn about Ethiopia's territorial integrity and all that they give a lip service over. Yeah, they wanted the disintegration of Sudan, and for very same reason, I would say. Yeah, and then of course there is another layer to that: resources. We sit on three important resource bases. Yeah, the gold, which is the Nubian Sheet, and then there is oil and gas in this area as well. Yeah, all the way. And I mean, we can pretend, that America is a congruent state, and therefore, no, America is not congruent. Yeah, American foreign policy is not congruent. It's guided and driven by other who are paying those whatever they call politicians, governors, or whatever you want to call them. They are dearly paid to serve the interests of special interests that are operating behind the scene. Yeah, what are those special interests? They could be foreign, they could be local, but then multinational as well, corporations. Yeah. So if you see this American history and its broad 100, 200 years, it has been dominated by those special interests that are operating behind the curtains. Yeah. And what they are doing today it reflects that as well. Some are sympathetic to us, others are very much against us. Yeah. And they pay lip service. They're fancy words that they mobilize. Yeah. We are looking for the interests of Ethiopians. We like Ethiopians. We like you guys. And no, that's not how it works. There are certain interests operating in the shadows, and they are their foreign policy reflects that, with all its contradiction, I might add, because those special interests do not have the same kind of interest either. So you must bear that in mind. Okay. Now, moving to the military, yeah, we don't know what it brought in. Did we check? Did we search it? From where did it fly? I'm assuming it's from Djibouti directly. I wouldn't say that it went to Addis and then flew from Addis to Mekelle. I have no detailed information, but my suspicion is that it flew directly from Djibouti, and then probably also went directly to Djibouti, taking I don't know how many numbers of TPLF old guards and the individuals that they want to take out. Yeah, and of course, Ethiopian government is showing a lot of goodwill. Yeah, and politics of appeasement, and I think that has a lot of cost, but it's looking at the long term. Probably doesn't want to be hampering a peace process, and it's not in the interest of Ethiopia also to undermine the African Union. It's not in the best interest of Ethiopia to shut the door on peace and any peace process. And that in this case, it would mean allowing certain slip ups, yeah, and knowing forward that there might be something that they would take to them or coach them or support them. We all know that the Americans had been embroiled in this, so we can't pretend all we like, but whatever they have given to Tigray as aid, it was diverted directly into war-making efforts of the TPLF. I don't know how many percent of it actually was given to the needy people of Tigray, and our brothers and sisters. I'm definitely sure, are not the beneficiaries of this arrangement. But the Ethiopian government knew that, and the Americans were also aware of that. It was going to war-making efforts, but that was the purpose. Same way that the fuel was stolen. Yeah, 570,000 fuel was stolen in a broad daylight, and then the best explanation they give us was a TPLF stole it, and they just tweeted that. Yeah, that's all. And they knew it was wink, wink, and then TPLF took it. And then obviously we're going to say something bad about it, but you carry on, do what you have to do. And that's the kind of arrangement this is very common in the politics across the world. That's how they organize it. Yeah, they give you the windows, to do some nasty stuff, and then they come out and say something about it, and then it will be the end of it. And that's exactly what they did. So Americans are supporting TPLF materially, diplomatically, politically. Yeah, look at the ways in which Western-controlled medias are broadcasting this conflict. Yeah, the ways in which they present the stories about this conflict. From Kenya, whether it's in New York, or from wherever they are, DC, the kind of narrative that they deliver, it reflects American interest. Yeah, it reflects American propaganda. We might talk about TPLF's riches that they have taken away and looted from Ethiopia, and now they're using it to mobilize this kind of media campaign. I certainly doubt that it was all with TPLF's, strengths. It reflects Western domination and the desire to continue to dominate our region and the continent. Because we should not see Ethiopia, Eritrea, the Horn of Africa in isolation. Look at what's happening in Mali, Chad. Look at what's happening in Equatorial Guinea, Burkina Faso. All this region, they are very much interrelated. You must understand. This integrated element of this campaign. Yeah, it looks isolated. The emphasis is on the Horn of Africa, but if you look at other newspapers, they're talking about, even the same newspapers we continue to read, the ways in which they talk about all those areas, that reflects Western anxiety. Now their domination is being challenged. Their imposition on this continent is being severely reduced. Yeah, and now they do not want to lose that, and showing kind of struggle to retain that position is what's reflected in those campaigns, the concerted campaigns. Even the UN is embroiled in this because it's been co-opted. We all know that the UN is significantly co-opted in this. Yeah. I think I spoke a bit at length. I leave it here. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Bina. Really, yeah. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you also, Brother Gabriel, for throwing that question. So, if you want to, I'll just give you quickly. If you want to react to what Brother Bina said, and then I will ask my final question.
Before I react, I want to apologize for asking the question. It was only for me. It came naturally with what we were discussing. That's why I apologize for any. On the reaction, I think I agree with everything he said. On the UN co-option, however, I don't think it's co-opted. I think the UN was always established to maintain Western hegemony. When decolonization started, they were panicking. I don't know if you know. There's quite a famous economist called Michael Hudson, and Michael Parenti. They studied that specific time. Michael Parenti is a political historian, and from their view, they're both Americans. From their view, Britain and the France had collapsed. America came over as the new hegemon, as the new empire, and they bought everything. They took everything. They took everything from the British. They took everything from the French, and they told them, your economies belong to us. We'll give you the Marshall Plan. You trade in dollars. We control everything. And that's what happened. But they were a bit smarter than the British and the French. They saw decolonization happening. So they said, while it's happening, we're going to channel that effort that's coming up into the UN. And I think it was always established to protect Western empires, Western colonies, and Western colonial interests. And I think you brought up some of the CFA areas. The CFA area, basically, those 14 countries are managed economically from the central bank of France. I mean, that's just their money's printed there, their interest rates are designed there. The way their fiscal policy is rolled out is first agreed at the Académie Française. I mean, I think the UN was always a colonial institution, in my view. So that's the only comment I would have. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother Gabriel. I would. I know I said this will be my final question, but then this came up. I was reading on a news today, and where the U.S. embassy actually has warned there will be a possible attack in Johannesburg. What are we supposed to translate? I mean, this to us, considering the ongoing peace talks in South Africa. Can you, throw a light on that, Brother Binyam, and maybe you would have also Gabriel, and then I promise the final question.
That's very funny. The US knew about it, but the South African intelligence had no idea about it. South African government said, no, we had no idea what they're talking about. It might mean two things. So one, South African intelligence is not that strong, and trying to protect its own security, or the Americans are cooking something. Those are the two. Well, one might say the third one. They might have a better intelligence. But I certainly doubt that. Yeah. At the same time, they have also issued a similar warning about Nigeria. I'm sure you've heard about that too. They have made a similar warning. Scaring other states, scaring states is a very good strategy. Yeah. To control them, yourself fear, and it allows you to control it. So you first create the problem, then you come into managing it. It's a very known strategy for the West, particularly the American establishment. Yeah, they create the problem, and then they come as the providers of that solution. Now you're going to be dependent on the intelligence also, and so they move in this direction, that direction. So you become constantly looking for their advice or their support, and that is the kind of issue that we are looking at. Yeah, and it's not with this particular intelligence. Yeah, maybe it's I mean, some people felt that it is about disrupting the peace negotiation. That is their baby, so they're handling it very well protected. No one is even coming closer to that. Yeah. We saw Uhuru and Uhuru Kenyatta and President Obasanjo walking in, but that's a really protected area. No worries about that. But what they're doing is they're selling fear and they're using terrorism. Look at what they did to Mozambique. Mozambique has ISS. Have you heard of that? All of a sudden, we didn't even know Muslims live in Mozambique. Of course, we knew that there are mosques and what have you, but there was never this kind of radicalism. But they immediately, as soon as that Mozambique declared that it had oil and gas, now ISIS just popped up. And it's a bizarre world. And anyway, this is the kind of world that they have established for us. And at some point, it has to end. That's what
Hopefully. Brother Gabriel, would you like to share something on that?
No, I would just agree with him on this one. But I don't have any information what's happening. But it is a pattern with the U.S. government that they will always threaten those people that they don't agree with or that they are afraid of by saying somebody else will attack you. And then this somebody else just appears. When I was working for the Ethiopian government in Doluado, which was a rear base for the war, we were all surprised to find quite a lot of anti-Russian Chechens working in Somalia. There were quite a lot of Tunisians, Algerians, all of them being paid in dollars, in pounds, and in euro. It was always a surprise to Ethiopian intelligence. We'd get briefings. We'd be told, okay, no, we're studying it. The TPLF, especially the APRDF, knew, of course, how these people were coming. It was always a big problem for us. Now they're out, most of them. Some of them are still around. There's a very good Vice documentary on this. And I chose Vice because Vice is very anti-Ethiopia, very pro-US. But even Vice admits that there are mercenaries working in Somalia. They have a very good... and mercenaries paid by the British, paid by the Americans. So I would only agree and say there's more evidence than that over the past 30 years. This is just how they operate as America.
Thank you, Brother Gabriel. So what can we expect from this peace talk, for the government of Ethiopia, including TPLF as well, and as for the Horn of Africa, and for the African Union or / Africa itself? I mean, I know that here and there you have touched upon it during, responding to the various questions earlier, but if we can just summarize. We will start. So go, Brother Binyam. Oops, sorry.
That's $1 million question, isn't it? There is this challenge. Yeah, who are the negotiators? Yeah, if you know who you are negotiating with, it would make it a lot easier, as Gabriel has raised. Yeah, the Americans have a stake, and now it's part of the reason why they have now find their way inside the negotiating table, whether it's an observer status or whatever kind of status that American envoy is allowed to be in that negotiation peace talk. What do the Americans want? Yeah, what do they want, and how do they want to get that? Yeah, and obviously the Ethiopian government has made it very clear there cannot be two armies in the country. One army, that's it. One state, one army, and you accept the constitution of that state. That's the bottom line. Yeah, and is it going to be accepted by TPLF? TPLF is a vested military power, and politically it's also vested. I don't think people understand. People of Tigray feel about TPLF at this stage. And we're not going to see TPLF coming back in any form. America might want that. I don't know if they even want that. Maybe they want something else. But that has to be made clear. It must be out in the open. You can't play a card without knowing what those cards are. Yeah. So that's the fundamental challenge. Yeah. Maybe the Americans want this conflict to continue to linger until the right time, opportune time arises. But at this stage, all areas that are stronghold for TPLF are taken. People talk about Kola Tembe. Kola Tembe, some people are talking about the terrain, famous terrain. It's not going to work anymore. Yeah. TPLF is a Western force, military, politically. Now, at that negotiating table, they just have to hand over their hard ways. That's it. That's the only meaningful way to come out of it. But that's not the question here, because we're not negotiating with the TPLF. The Ethiopian government is not negotiating with TPLF. It is negotiating with a party that's not saying anything, but it wants to have a table at that talk. And unless that entity says what it wants, because this war has an owner. The owner is not TPLF. We have already established that. The owner is the US government and its groupies, the Europeans. That's all. And what do they want out of it is very important to identify, to pin down. They're not saying much, but we can speculate. Yeah, this is what they want. But ultimately, I think the region is going to emerge a victor. Ethiopia and Eritrea deserve a better peace, a better opportunity. All this wasted opportunity. It's really sickening and it's very sad. Yeah, we wanted to channel all our energy into something good, something better for our communities, for our people. For our region, and we could lead by example by transforming our communities, our countries, yeah, and the whole could see a prosperous future, a prosperous and secure state. Now that has to come. That has to be ensured. And this talk is just basically it's going to end up being a talk if it cannot deliver that. That's my final word. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Binyam, for those final words. Yes, Brother Gabrahiwetz, what can we expect?
Well, thank you, Sister Mahalit. I mean, I would say I was raised in a tradition where my grandmother would make me pray every morning. Salam Laki, she starts. Peace be upon you, Ethiopia. And that's how we started. So I think I would never speak ill of any peace process. I hope it succeeds. I really do. I hope we get a peace out of it that we can all accept. But we cannot prejudge that. And as Dr. Binyam said, it is a huge problem that the Americans have not made a direct claim as to what they want. So we will just have to see if, without one of the belligerents saying this is how we'll resolve it, is very difficult to resolve. So I hope they find in the next 5-6 days what happens. All we can do, and this is why I'm here, and thank you, Mahadit, for having us, because opportunities like this for Africans, for Ethiopians to sit down, you've had Somalis before, you've had people from other nations, from Uganda, from everywhere, sitting down and discussing how to solve these problems, I think, is the first step to peace. That's why I was very happy when you invited me. And I think that's all we can do, work as much as we can where we are for peace and hope that it arrives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, really, indeed, for those words. I did enjoy the dynamic of our discussion. As I said, President has been here many times. We do hear the background. I know it's time to end up. We are ending it. And also, it's a first time for Brother Gabriel, but definitely it's not the last time. We do hope that you will join us in the future also to share your views. Yes, we do. We share. We keep on talking, and I mean, I am very sure that those few ears that listens to this, we create awareness, and so we invite also others to discuss. And more than anything, it's not the party, it's not the government, it's all about community, it's all about people. So that's the most
Absolutely.
important thing. When we are so connected, then we will rise up to protect that peace, and we will no more listen to what politicians say. Thank you very much, and it was really my pleasure to have you both here. Is that we end our session? Thank you.
Thank you, Marley. Thank you for providing us this opportunity. I really appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Gabriel. We are going to see a lot more peace, a lot more stability. We'll definitely have time to be talking about other less serious matters, matters of dance and tune and music and food. And I think I can't wait for that. Okay.
Yeah, and
Thank you both.
business, economy, those are the things
Exactly.
that we should work on.
Thank you,
Oh,
Marley.
bye-bye.
Thank
Have
you,
a good
Gabriel.
evening, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Bye.